So I'm Karim, and I'm a philosopher here. Although in the last few years I've been pivoting towards the field of future studies and technology studies in a broader sense. And I think it's partly due to this project, actually. It's something that I've been interested in doing for quite some time, but this gave me this opportunity to go wild, to focus on this. And this is a paper that we have a manuscript that is going to be submitted, but you can also find it in the anthology with me and Emma. So the project is trying to address the question of what is a sustainable population, and we wanted to flip the question in one sense and say, what are the technologies that could delineate a pathway from here to a desired future outcome that is sustainable? So first we start by describing the challenge ahead of us. Well, one challenge is that the population by 2100 in 76 years will be at least 10 billion or around 10 billion. We have a large number of people who suffer from hunger today, 0.8 billion. Here, hunger is not the same thing as starvation, of course, this is important to note, but they are getting less calories than is good for them for their health. And we have 4 critical planetary boundaries, and planetary boundaries is this concept introduced by Johan Rockström and others that we find very useful, that are directly related to agriculture and food production. One of them is, of course, climate change. Food production and agriculture plays an important role there. We have biogeochemical flows, basically runoff from fertilizers, but also from manure from animals, and land system change, which is basically deforestation and the transformation of wetlands to agricultural land, and biosphere integrity, which means basically species extinction. And all these are intimately tied to climate change, to agriculture. The climate change, with regard to climate change, agriculture is a significant but a small part of the problem, about 10 to 20%, depending on who you ask. But so it's a smaller part, yet it's a significant part. With the other ones, it's the dominant part. So this is the challenge. And to do this, we have done an exercise that is common in future studies that's called backcasting. And here we start with a desirable future, some goal that we want to attain. We delineate potential pathways between us now and the future, and then explore the feasibilities and try to identify the politics that can be used and technology that can be used to get there. And the idea here is that we can chart multiple pathways, and we can also say that, if we have a little bit of this, then we need more of that, for example. If we reduce meat consumption by a lot, then the pressure on other kinds of innovation is not going to be as considerable. Although if we don't change meat consumption, we have a different kind of challenge. Okay, so the endpoint that we're interested in 2100 is we are assuming that the trends in population growth will continue as predicted by the UN. That all the planetary boundaries that are related to agriculture are in a safe space, that is in the green area, and there's no hunger. So that means that we need to reduce land use from today's levels by quite a lot. I think it's by 25%. I'll get back to that. We need to reduce fertilizer runoff, and we need to massively improve carbon efficiency. So that's a kind of the target. So what we've done here is that we've evaluated a large set of potentially disruptive technologies and analyzed their contribution to this problem, and the obstacles, complications, and facilitating conditions, and what their potential if introduced, and describe like how does the picture look like? What are the potentials here? And we made a short list of technologies, and then we made it even shorter, and we landed in these three technologies, or technological clusters, so to speak, because they address three different, very important parts of the food production cycle, or the food production, of food production. Vertical farming, C for photosynthesis, and substitutes for animal products, and I will come into them in some more detail now. So vertical farming consists of growing crops in a controlled environment with stacked layers with hydroponic plants, and this technique uses an inert soil, for example gravel, and circulates nitrogen-rich water here. And this technique has a potential to make a considerable contribution with regards to vegetables and fruits and herbs and tubers, plants that are, well, most kind of non-cereal plants. The potential here to save land is quite remarkable. So, as an example, a vertical farm can produce lettuce in 1/80th of the land use of a traditional farm. 1/80, 1/80. It's also, furthermore, since this system is a closed loop, you can reduce runoff into the environment to essentially zero, because you have the nitrogen, it's circulating, it doesn't end up in the sewers and so on. You still need some pesticide, because it's very difficult to control an environment to get rid completely of pests. But you need much less pesticide, and more importantly, the pesticide that is being used in this environment can be prevented from leaking out to the environment and coming into contact with non-pest insects and marine animals. And it also reduces water use by a lot, by a factor of 90 as well. The problems here is that this requires a lot of energy, much more energy than traditional farming. So if you get most of this energy from fossil fuels, the ecological impact will be largely negative. But if you use it from fossil-free fuels, solar, wind, or nuclear, or hydro, then you can have major ecological improvements relative to traditional farms. It's also particularly attractive for countries that are water scarce and that have scarce farmland, because another thing that you can do with this technology is that you can source your plants from environments that are otherwise not interesting from an ecological point of view, like an old parking lot, an abandoned mine, those kind of places. So the potential here is that you could, if it could be used for vegetables, fruits, and so on, you could reduce the impact by 1 or 2 orders of magnitude in terms of land, and completely eliminate eutrophication. Of course, the limits to this technology, and we've in the last few years seen a large wave of bankruptcies in the vertical farming sector, which I believe points to the I think it indicates that this technology is not mature yet. Energy efficiency in lighting needs to improve by at least 1 order of magnitude, but it's also another limiting condition is that it requires a lot of expensive labor. But here is a field where automation could make a big difference. Okay, next technology is C for photosynthesis, and this technology would improve the yields of cereals. And cereals are, of course, the backbone of global food production. Cereals cover about 1.1 billion hectares of land, and many cereals use an inferior type of photosynthesis, including wheat and rice. So here you have rice. Rice takes up CO2 directly from the air, but this molecule that absorbs CO2 is really bad at doing it. So by mistake, it sometimes grabs O2, oxygen. And oxygen is quite reactive and bad for the plant. So the plant needs to spend a lot of energy expelling that oxygen. And that means that this plant grows much slower than plants that use this intermediate mechanism, a mesophyll cell that can absorb CO2 and then pumps in the CO2 directly into the rubisco molecule. And this is why corn and sugarcane and sorghum is so good at converting light, photosynthesis, into sugar. It has a much higher conversion efficiency than rice. And there's ongoing experimental efforts at doing this with rice, but also wheat and barley. And this could potentially double the yields per hectare for these crops. Furthermore, it would also increase nitrogen retention, so it would reduce the amount of nitrogen needed per hectare. And it also increases the water retention of the crop. So the crop becomes more drought resistant. So this kind of transferring the photosynthetic mechanism from these kinds of plants to these plants could have a significant and disruptive effect. This is a picture. And the third disruptive technology are alternatives to animal foods. So animal foods are the elephant in the room or the cow in the room. They have a huge impact with regards to land use, also CO2 emissions or methane emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, but also on eutrophication. And the reason for that is that manure is very heavy and it's expensive to move. So if you have a large concentration of cattle, as in many American farms, you will also, you import food from a huge radius, you will concentrate lots of nitrogens there. And that means that you need to export the manure to the region you extracted the food from to not get too much in one point. And this doesn't happen because it's very expensive. So most of it ends up in the water. So alternatives to animal food has a very, very big potential impact on these goals. And why we point to alternatives and not just consumption behavior is because we believe, there's good reason to believe that there are many countries have traditions and cultural norms and maybe people have innate preferences that contribute to meat consumption. It's a very robust trend that countries that become richer also increase their food consumption. Meat consumption. And here there are considerable obstacles. Although these alternatives are becoming more competitive, there needs to be a level playing field. Here there's a lot of policies that could be enacted, and one of the big giants here in affecting this outcome could be the EU. The EU contributes with a lot of money to the keeping of cattle and meat production. And finally, I just want to mention, and this is kind of an extra alternative, is a very promising development that we have seen in the last 5 years is the development of hydrogen-based protein. So this is a kind of a bacteria that you feed it hydrogen, and you can produce hydrogen with electricity, and it will produce proteins for you. And this is quite remarkable, and in many ways much better than cell cultures. So cell cultures have been the big thing, in vitro meat, but the sheer fecundity of bacteria, I think, talks in favor of this technology. So a bacteria doubles in every 20 minutes, whereas a muscle cell takes about 24 hours. The doubling rate means there's a huge difference in how much production you can get from unit of time. Okay.
So Karim has talked about these 3 technologies, and I will sort of try to quantify their effect, because it's one thing is to say these are good things, And there's another chance to sort of figure out how good they will actually be. And then I found this fabulous paper about Poor and Nemetsek, and they go through the climate impact of an average food plate. So, you know, what I eat in average over a day, what's the impact from that in terms of climate, land use, eutrophying emissions. And so that was a great starting point. And then we sort of use that plate as in the back of our minds, and then we say, okay, what if everyone would use these three technologies instead of what we use today? And then so there's a list of food also in this paper, this fabulous paper. They take all the foods like tomatoes, cucumber, cheese, and they say how much in average we eat of it. So our job was then to sort of, okay, tomatoes, that's 1/100th of a plate, and then tomatoes can be replaced by vertical farming, like one of the three. So we basically make these three categories of all foods. So the three categories are like fruit and vegetables, grains, like cereals, and then animal protein, like dairy, and meat. So we have these three categories, and then we say like, oh, the foods here, they're replaced by one of the three, except a little bunch of others, which we cannot really deal with these three technologies. And then we say, okay, let's assume that instead of drinking, you know, cow milk, we have this animal, or like the kind of fake, the plant-based alternative or the hydrogen-based alternative. And then we say that, okay, let's say an average person in 2100 will eat as the average person today in terms of like shares of the different foods. And that's sort of something we chose in this study. We don't want to mess too much with the consumers. That's a kind of premise for the whole analysis, because somehow, you know, that's big policy challenge to change people, make people sort of altruistic in this domain, right? So we kind of, okay, we accept people who eat the same thing then as now, or at least it will look the same on the plate or kind of feel the same. And then we allow ourselves to assume this kind of net zero climate emissions from energy. Because of climate pledges 2050, the world has kind of promised to deliver on this. And this is 2100. So that's easy after 2050. And then so we take these three categories, and then okay, we have this sort of impact here, climate. So okay, we have carbon-free energy, net zero climate impact, land use, and then we need to look through the literature on like fruits and vegetables. What's the impact of vertical farming in terms of land use, right? Like, and then we need the reference there, and then we do the same in terms of eutrophication. So we need to fill all these kind of boxes. And then we do this, you know, Excel exercise, and other is basically kept. Then we can't deal with those. And then here's the sort of outcome, right? And then we have land use, this dimension, and then so here's an average fruit plate today. Fruit and vegetables, this is their contribution to land use. And the big one, the elephant in the room, the cow in the room, is the animal-based protein. So this one, if everyone adopts this fabulous hydrogen stuff Karim is talking about, it will go down substantially according to this calculation. And so basically the land we will need will be much reduced, right? And then we do the same. This is a bit repetitive, but here's the eutrophication. Still again, we have the big one in the middle here, and then there's the grains, and then it goes down substantially, and this is, the fertilizer and manure, that kind of dimension being substantially reduced. And the last one, this is a bit maybe simplistic, but basically if we allow ourselves to assume this kind of net GHG emissions go down to zero. So of course it becomes zero then.
Transport is not included.
Well, it's a bit, new means of transport, like hydrogen, fuel cell. Everything's possible, 2100. So basically, we have to remind ourselves of the target scenario, backcasting, so no hunger, we become 10 billion, and all the critical planetary boundaries are in a safe operating zone. And then we need to multiply with 1.5 because we need 50% more food. according to FAO, and we kind of buy that. So we take the results in the previous slides and we calculate this, and then we say, okay, climate, yeah, that's kind of 0, but land use is only 58% of current levels. So that's a substantial reduction in the land use. And eutrophiing emissions, 59%. So we say that we have met these goals, right? Because it cannot be 0, like we cannot make food from no land, but it's less land. Here's the sort of conclusions or discussion. So basically, something must change for other things to stay the same. Like if we want to keep our consumption, we want to eat the same food, but we cannot produce the food the same way we do today. That's sort of given. That's Rockström's finding. Like this is kind of common knowledge. Something needs to change, but we try to not mess with the consumers so much in the study. We basically say you will get the same sort of plate, but the production process will be different, right? So we recognize that producers, the people who live off of farming and have this as a culture, they will be totally affected by this. But the consumers who go to the store and buy a bunch of meat, they will not be affected so much. But of course, we totally recognize that there is this thing. You need to accept that there's going to be some change, right? There's in the back of the processing, the things that's behind the counter. So there will be like GMOs, like the C for photosynthesis. That's surely a GMO, right? So that's controversial to some. And then this is an interesting finding. Malcolm, you picked up on this one. So basically, there's this dogma like electrifying everything in climate debate, and then we're saying basically if we electrify food production, that will also address some of the other environmental dimensions, not only climate, right? So like land use and eutrophying emissions. But of course we recognize there are challenges involved. Electricity is a big one. We have to accept new technologies. And we talk about how this can be promoted, but of course this is under discussion. This is like how people need to understand that agriculture has a lot of externalities, not only climate. And then we need new technologies to address. And of course all of these technologies have challenges, and they need to be dealt with in the coming 75 years. But we believe with this paper that it's possible. Right. Thank you.